Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Gapester here. This is the heroic Socrethar the Eternal Guide. And this fight is gone through a few changes in recent days. A number of ups and downs in terms of difficulty, but it's probably about where it's going to sit for now. So overall, this is a above average difficulty fight, but mechanically it's quite simple. There's not a whole lot of abilities going on, but it does require some pretty precise positioning, a lot of interrupts, and at least one raid member to control the robot that you will take control of once you destroy it to help deal with the ads and the main boss. So when you begin the fight, you will initially engage the construct. And this construct is fairly weak in that it has very low health, but that's by design. The goal is to kill it, and then you'll be able to take control of it to help you fight off the soul of Socrethar himself, which is the main boss. So by far the most critical ability to handle against the construct himself is the Reverberating Blow attack. He will use this and other abilities kind of on a loose cooldown system, but usually the fastest that you'll see this is about every 17 to 18 seconds. This ability is a cone attack. You can see it there, just went off in the background. And it will hit anyone in front of him, so toward the tank that has aggro, in a pretty large cone. This ability does moderate to heavy physical damage, but anyone that gets hit by it is also eligible to receive 3 stacks of the Shattered Defense debuff. And this debuff tries to disperse itself evenly among the 3 closest players that get hit by the cone attack. So, in other words, if you are the only person in this attack, say that tank is soloing it, which you see I'm doing in a number of these clips, then that person gets all 3 stacks on them. And this debuff increases the damage that you take by future reverberating blows, by 200% per stack. However, if you have 3 people in it, all 3 of these people will receive 1 stack each. It'll distribute evenly. If you have 5 people in it, it will try to choose the 3 nearest players to distribute the 3 stacks. But it's still always going to evenly split it. And then, of course, 2 people, you'd get 2 on one and 1 on the other, somewhat randomly. So, with that in mind, you can, to some degree, plan who will receive these debuff stacks and how you, therefore, want to distribute that damage. Now, there are probably many viable tactics for dealing with Reverberating Blow, and we tried a number of them actually, but the one we settled on that really seemed to work the best, probably because of our composition, was to essentially solo tank the majority of it. This is using a monk tank, as you can see from my perspective. So the basic idea is that for the majority of the casts before the construct is actually killed, nobody is standing in front to help soak the damage and therefore absorb the stacks other than the tank. And one key component to this is that the stack count on Shattered Defense caps out at 5. So 5 stacks, 1,000% increase in the damage means that on Heroic, this deals about 2.5 million physical damage at a 5 stack cap, before physical mitigation, before cooldowns, before all that stuff. So that's a huge amount of damage, of course, but it's completely viable to mitigate this damage, just depending on what abilities you have available to you as a tank or in your raid. And remember, because it's physical, you could also actually use stuff like Cannon Protection even from an outside source. Because it has a cast time, the tank is not getting meleeed during that period, so you can just preemptively Cannon Protection the tank during the cast. He just stands there and gets hit for nothing, uses a macro to remove the buff, and you go on your way. And obviously you couldn't do that for every cast, but you can sort of rotate your cooldowns. So because of this, it's completely possible to solo tank this encounter. If your raid needs a little bit of extra healing or damage, and you don't want to use 2 tanks, you can absolutely do that. We didn't choose to do that. It wasn't really necessary and wouldn't provide that much benefit to our particular composition. So we stick to 2 tanks, and you'll see, partly we just use one of them on the robot later on anyway. But it's something you can consider if you really want to, but you won't gain a whole lot out of it other than the first phase. Anyway, I'll talk more about the tanking specifics in the tank tip section for people that want details on how to go about doing that. But if your raid doesn't want to do the solo tank thing, or you just don't have a viable way to do it, then you can absolutely do it more legitimate way. And generally, this is going to be rotating the Reverberating Blow, the cone attack itself, between a number of smaller groups that include the tanks. Since it always faces, whichever tank currently has threat, that current tank is always going to get hit by it, at least one stack. Now, you could just have one tank get one stack every cast, and therefore arguably get 5 total casts, and then you should be phased by then. The construct really won't live longer than 4 or 5 of those in the first phase. The general thing to keep in mind is that because the cast time or the cooldown is a minimum of about 17 seconds, and the debuff Reverberating Blows lasts 45 seconds, you don't want to allow it to stack up on non-tank players, which you're going to have to use unless you do the solo tank shenanigans. So to do that, you need to adjust between at least 2 different groups of 2 or more people. So you can use melee for this, you can use a combination of ranged, it doesn't really matter what, but because of the other mechanics that are going on, sometimes it's going to be difficult to always plan for that. If you want to be as efficient as humanly possible, use 4 melee DPS, or a melee healer like a monk, and a combination of melee DPS along with your tank. And essentially you would rarely move the boss, facing him always away from the majority of the raid. And when it's a particular group's turn to soak, the tank just stays still, facing the boss away, and the 2 players, whichever pair, come in front to help soak with the tank. Once the Reverberating Blow hits that first group, they rotate out, second group comes in, the other 2 players, they stand in front, wait for the second cast of Blow to hit, and then rotate again, back and forth, back and forth. If you want to be as maximally efficient as possible, and you can afford the other positioning requirements, absolutely that's the most efficient way to do it. And during this, the current tank will only get 1 stack per cast. This means that for the most part, just about any tank could reasonably hold the boss the entire duration, reaching 3, 4, maybe up to 5 stacks. But the thing to keep in mind is that the actual cast itself that hits you and applies a stack, the damage from that is not increased by the stack count that was applied from that particular cast. It only affects future casts. So the first cast you take as a tank, you're not going to get any extra damage from it. You only get some on the next one, and so on and so forth. So the maximum, if you get 5 total casts in the first phase, and you get 1 stack each time, the maximum damage boost you're going to take is from 4 stacks on the tank, which is 800%. So with a huge personal cooldown, some outside help, you could absolutely deal with that. Beyond that, if you really want to get efficient, you're using 2 tanks, then you can stick with the 2 pairs of 2 players as the soak teams with the tank, but then also rotate your tanks. That's another option. You want to make sure that both tanks are not in front at the same time, but other than that, you can just have 1 tank stay there for 2 or 3 casts, talent swap, next tank comes up front, does the same thing, 2 or 3 casts, then you phase, and that's it. So anyway, I know that's a lot of explanation for one ability, but it really is the critical ability to get right in the first phase. And there are a lot of ways you can handle it, so just giving you some options there. And, it's up to your raid to decide which will work best. So outside of that, there are just a few abilities that the construct will use on the raid during this phase. Generally, the rule is the same. He will cast Volatile Fel Orb on a random ranged player, and this will just create a tiny little orb that will chase that player, and once it hits them, gets into range of them, it will detonate and deal damage to that player and anyone within 10 yards. So the basic rule of thumb is the player needs to run out, away from the raid, off to the side, wait for the orb to reach them. As long as they're 10 yards away, let it reach you and explode, so you can come back into the raid and do your normal stuff. Same thing with Fellblaze Charge. He will charge after a short time of targeting a random ranged player again. I believe it's range, maybe melee also. But either way, the goal is the same. The player should run off to the side, away from the rest of the raid, and after a moment, the boss will charge toward them and then charge back to the tank. When he does the charge, he will leave a stream of fire on the ground, this Fellblaze residue, that does pretty heavy damage every second, and it also slows you if you're standing in it. And the slow is actually the worst part about it. Obviously, you don't want to take damage and stand in it unintentionally, but if you get caught in it, you have to cross over it for some reason, it's going to be really difficult to get through it quickly. So don't be afraid to use jumps or sprints or anything like that if you have to pass over this. The final mechanic that the raid has to really watch for is Fell Prison. This is cast very infrequently, by far the least common ability, but he will just create a ring on the ground. You can see one on the top right there, and after a few seconds this will activate, and once it's activated, any player that's inside the ring or that steps into it after the fact will become prisoned, and essentially they're just shackled to a little crystal, and this crystal needs to be killed before those players or player is broken away and can resume the fight. But the best course of action is to not get hit at all. So watch closely when he casts Prison, have the entire raid if necessary, just move to the side. So you can see the general positioning that we use for this first phase is to pull the boss to a corner of the room. This is to keep the fire residue paths that are created when he charges around out of the center of the room so we can freely move where we need to in the second phase. But beyond that, it also allows us to better keep the prisons out of, screwing us over as well. Once something like a prison happens where the raid has to move, we can just adjust along the edge of the wall and just keep moving down that side until it's time to transition once we kill him. The final thing to briefly mention in this phase is that there is going to be an overwhelming power ability going on, which essentially just is a way to deal damage to random raid members during the phase. That is sort of unavoidable damage. So if it's on players, just heal through it, and it's just a way to keep your healers busy in this phase, because otherwise there's really nothing that's going to do significant amount of damage, particularly if you handle Reverberating Blow pretty well. Now, once you destroy the construct, you will see the soul of Socrethar emerge, and after a few seconds of spawning, he needs to be picked up and tanked just like normal. This also causes the construct itself to deactivate, and this will allow a raid member to click on it and essentially pilot the construct for the second phase. So you can see in the footage here, this was my role in the second phase as one of the tanks. Now, the basic idea of this phase is your goal, of course, is to kill the soul of Socrethar himself, but you need to do so using the abilities that the construct used against you in the first phase to help you kill Socrethar, as well as 3 different ad types that will emerge from 3 different colored portals around the room. So you have the red portals, which will always spawn along the central track. So either the left center or right center. In this case, it's the relatively left center. And these will spawn the Dominators, which essentially will shield the boss. You have the blue portals, which will spawn on the outside edge. These spawn a set of Wailing Souls, which fixate on players and try to get a melee range to explode and kill people. And then you also have the purple portal, which also spawns on the outside edge. It will always spawn on the opposite side of the room to wherever the blue one is, and vice versa. And these purple portals will spawn the Shadowcallers, which just emerge one at a time and will use sort of volley attacks for the most part. Now, beyond dealing with all these ads, the boss himself, the soul of Socrethar, his sort of goal in this phase is to kill the robot and essentially be able to get back inside it and make you resume phase 1 again, make you do it over. He does this by casting an Exert Dominance ability very frequently, maybe every 5 or 6 seconds. And this has a 3-second cast time, and if it goes off, it will deal 5% of the robot's health and damage to the construct. So, quick math tells you 20 of these casts, if nothing else does damage to the robot, means the phase ends, because the robot will die, the soul will quickly go back into the construct, and you'll have to fight it once again, dealing with whatever adds that were up at the time, and you just repeat the process after that. So the goal, for the most part, when you're dealing with all this, is to prevent as many casts of Exert Dominance as possible through interrupts and dealing with the adds properly, so that the robot can remain active as long as possible and do as much damage as you can get out of it. The primary source of damage in this phase, at least from an individual, of course, will come from the robot. It does a huge amount of DPS just from white attacks as well as some of its special abilities. So you want to try to keep the construct alive as long as possible. In addition, of course, allowing you to attack the boss and not have to deal with the construct itself any more times. So to get into detail about the adds that you'll face in this main phase, I will start with the Dominator. And the Sargeri Dominator spawn, as mentioned from the red portal, just one at a time, but these take absolute priority from all DPS in the raid. Shortly after they emerge, they will start attacking anyone nearby. This is a recent hotfix, so they don't one-shot people just as they pop out, but still you need to make sure your tank picks them up immediately. And the general goal, as mentioned, is to burst the Dominator down as quickly as possible, because while it is active, it will shield the boss himself, the Soul of Socrethar, with a Fell Barrier ability. And Fell Barrier basically makes the boss immune, and more importantly, prevents all interrupts. So this means that he can just chain cast Exert Dominance on the construct and wreck the construct's face, ending the phase much faster than it should. So the goal, again, when a Dominator spawns, is for everyone to kill it as quickly as possible, including the robot pilot, and just burn it down so that you can continue interrupting the soul as quickly as you can. Now, for the most part, the Dominator needs to be killed as quickly as you can. However, there's one ability that the Soul of Socrethar will use infrequently during the fight called Apocalypse, which sometimes changes the way you may choose to deal with a particular Dominator spawn. So the Apocalypse itself is a 10-second channel cast that the Soul will do. That just does raid-wide damage. It's kind of a heavy damage effect, forces raid cooldowns sometimes, that kind of thing. But while this is being cast, the Soul will not do any other abilities. So he will not cast Exert Dominance, dealing damage to the construct. This means for that 10-second period, it technically doesn't matter if a Dominator is alive, and therefore it's casting Fell Barrier at the time, preventing interrupts and damage on the boss, because he's not casting anything you need to interrupt. So if you look on the screen here, you can see that the timestamps on the left, these are just snippets from one of our kills, a log that we did, show kind of when the event takes place. So when a Dominator spawns and it casts Fell Barrier, protecting the boss, and when the boss casts Apocalypse. So you'll notice that the critical spawn, when there's overlap, is the third Dominator. And this will vary by a couple seconds here or there, but for the most part, when the third Dominator spawns, the boss is already casting Apocalypse, and this means that you do not need to prioritize killing that Dominator quite as quickly as the first one, the second one, and the fourth one, for example. So to improve your efficiency throughout the phase and deal with Dominators properly, try to plan to use burst cooldowns for the first, second, and fourth cast, but not on the third one if you need to save them due to time constraints. Because that third Dominator, again, is not actually protecting the boss from being interrupted because it's already doing Apocalypse, you can be slightly less aggressive on that third Dominator kill. So just a small tip that we learned that will help you be more efficient with dealing with these. The other big reason to kill the Dominator so quickly is because it will cast Gift of the Minari on random raid members. And this essentially is a 2-minute buff, very long duration, that will cause them to emit damage to anyone within 10 yards of them for the duration. And you can see around the bottom of the screen there are players that are afflicted with it. The positioning is quite good there. It's a great example. You need those players to move out of the raid, of course, but they have to be close enough to get healing and also close enough to control the angle that the souls will come in at if they get fixated. So you can overlap these circles, but you don't want to overlap the players that are obviously getting hit. Now you'll also need to deal with the haunting souls, which will spawn in sets from the blue portal, and these will move fairly quickly toward players that they are randomly fixated on using ghastly fixation. If the soul reaches the fixated player in melee range, it will destroy itself, but then it will also cast Virulent Haunt on the player. And this essentially is a short radius, about 5-yard radius area of effect that will apply a very heavy shadow dot to everyone around. That also, in addition to damage, horrify everyone for 8 seconds that it hits. So extremely dangerous because for the most part the raid will be stacked up, and if a haunting soul goes off, just game over for those people. So generally dealing with these ads, again, the Dominator takes precedent, but dealing with the Wailing Souls is the job pretty much of the Construct player in conjunction with a handful of ranged DPS that can help to deal with them. They are slowable and stunnable and all that, so you can use mitigation to slow them down, as well as the fire, and I'll talk more about that in the next section, and then just some extra area of effect damage from your ranged players, since melee can't afford to run out there and lose damage on the cleave target. Then finally we have the Sargerii Shadowcallers, which spawn just like Dominators, one at a time, but this time from the purple portals. And these are just casters. They will frequently cast Shadow Bolt Volley, which can be interrupted, but usually you won't be able to afford interrupts on that. And they will also use Shadow Word Agony on a few random raid members. And this is just a dot that lasts 10 seconds, does a bit of shadow damage, but it can stack. So there is some random element to their targeting, but if you get multiple stacks on someone, you're going to want to dispel it. If it's just one stack, though, you can generally kind of ignore it and just heal through the damage. It's arguable whether it's worth the mana to dispel versus just healing it, particularly for players that are in the stack with the raid that are getting area effect heals and whatnot, which is quite efficient. Now, dealing with the Shadowcallers is pretty much the same as the Souls, except instead of using the fire from the Construct, for the most part, you will just be using ranged DPS to deal with the Shadowcallers. You can assign, 2-3 ranged DPS to deal with them, and the goal is simply just to kill each one before the next one pops out around the same time, so that you don't have them stacking up on top of one another. But beyond that, you don't need an excessive amount of DPS on these. It's okay if one is alive, for quite a while, just so long as it dies around the time that the next spawn is coming out. So let's finally talk about piloting the construct itself. Again, this is the role of pretty much just one player in the raid, unless something terrible goes wrong and that person dies. You can't res them. But because I'm doing this role, I have quite a bit of experience with it, and hopefully I can share some of the tips that I've come across and learned over my experience, as well as some of the bad things that I did initially that aren't very good. So the primary role of the construct pilot is to do damage to the boss. As sad as it may be, you really won't be focusing on using all of the abilities you have access to, because they just simply aren't necessary relative to the damage that you can do to a single target. And this is primarily because the white hit damage from the construct is just so massive compared to everyone else in the raid. So the goal is try to maximize your uptime on the boss itself and the Dominators as well when those are available, so that you can help the raid kill them off as quickly as possible. Beyond that, the construct will also be using the charge ability, primarily to keep lines of the residue, the fire on the ground, to deal with the haunting souls. And other than that, pretty much ignoring the Shadowcallers. Now you'll notice that you get access to 4 of the abilities. So number 1 is Reverberating Blow, which, just like the normal version, does a cone attack. The good news is this doesn't do anything bad to your raid members. It only hits enemies. And if you are using it properly, you can be attacking in melee range of the soul and angle it so that it will hit some of the other ads that are coming out somewhere, because it's a pretty long cone. It will also stack the Shattered Defense, so increase the damage that target takes, and just like it would to you, and it caps out at 5 stacks. So you want to keep this going on the soul at all times. You also want to use it on the Dominator immediately when it spawns, so that you can just get a little bit of boost of extra damage in case you get a second cast off. Your second ability is the Fell Orb, and this one is great to use against the souls as well. But be careful that you do not use it at all on the boss or the Dominator, anything that's in range of the raid. This is because all the other abilities that the construct has, other than Reverberating Blow, will hit raid members, even when you are in control of it. So your Fell Orb, the Prison, which is number 3, and the Charge Fire effect, number 4, that will all hit raid members. So for the most part, you really can't use these abilities anywhere that would threaten raid members. You can only use Reverberating Blow. So as we begin the phase again, just to show you kind of how I start the process and then get into the pattern or ritual of piloting this. Initially, you want to identify where the red portal is, and your raid is going to pretty much start stacking there. And then you're going to prepare for the souls that are going to come out. So you have to put a line of fire between the raid stack position, which is generally near the red portal, and the blue portal where the souls are going to emerge. And because of the time of your cooldown on your charge ability, you will not have enough time to drop 2 charges, 2 lines of fire before the first souls come out. The cooldown is not fast enough. So this is why it's critical to really aim that first fire line in particular, so that it catches the majority of the souls as they come into the stacked raid position. It's also worth noting that that first set of souls in particular needs to be killed off really quickly, so that you can do a second fire line, right alongside the first one, so that you really cover the majority of the area that the souls will walk. The 2 fire lines next to one another is probably about the most you need, just to keep coverage for their entire pathway that they'll use. And I don't do a perfect job of the angles. You also may have noticed that I got particularly close on the second charge to the emerging set of souls, and this is very dangerous. One thing that can threaten the construct in this phase is if you get in melee range of a soul, it will cast an ability on you that does a huge amount of damage. Essentially, like just trying to murder you. And I assume this is just to prevent you from using Reverberating Blows to deal with them. But whatever the case may be, you as a construct pilot need to be very careful not to allow them to get in melee range of you. So this means that the previous set of souls needs to die early enough, if you need to drop another fire line, that you have time to get in position, aim your fire line, cast the charge, and then get out before the next soul set appears and gets too close to you. So once you have the first and then second fire line out, then your general goal is going to be focusing, like I said, all your DPS on Socrethar. Make sure you engage him in combat. If you don't do it automatically, right-click to engage your white attacks. And spam your Reverberating Blow, ideally when you're facing somewhere where it will hit other mobs. So other souls that are coming in or something like that. Or if you're attacking the Dominator, it'll hit the Shadowcallers, for example, stuff like that. But you'd never want to purposely run out and attack Shadowcallers or anything like that. The other thing I often will try to do, keep it on cooldown essentially, is the Fell Orb number 2 ability. This is particularly useful against the souls, As mentioned before, you cannot use it on the boss or the Dominator because it will explode and hit the raid members that are nearby. But because it's a range attack, you can cast it on souls that are super far away. So as soon as they emerge, target one, cast it on them, and then switch back to your main target. And this will shoot the orb out toward them, but since it doesn't explode until it reaches the targeted player, or enemy in this case, it won't do any damage to any raid members. So instead, it will explode in a 10-yard radius near the souls, potentially hitting all of them, and does a pretty sizable amount of damage to them. It helps a lot. You can usually get 2 or 3 casts off per set of souls, depending on how slowed they are. The other thing to keep in mind, as mentioned, you don't need to attack the Shadowcallers. The other thing is don't use your prison. When we first were learning this fight, we were trying it, particularly when the fight was changed from its original incarnation to a more buffed version. We were trying to use prison to trap things and just ignore them. And that absolutely works. Again, keep in mind, prison will imprison players as well if they stand in it. So you have to be careful if you're using that it doesn't catch someone else. But the issue with using prison is that the enemies don't take normal damage while they're prisoned. Just like a player, if they were to get caught, they wouldn't be able to do anything until the prison itself, the crystal, is broken. Same thing goes with the enemies. So you can attack the crystal if you imprison an enemy, but while the enemy is imprisoned, they are not going to take normal damage. They take almost nothing. Because of that, if you imprison, say, Shadowcallers, you can keep doing that and just chain prison the entire set that come out. Prison cooldown is not nearly as long as the prison itself lasts. So you can just keep prisoning on top of the same spot and just get them all. Or same thing with the souls. You could even prison both sides and just alternate back and forth and pretty much get every mob. But the problem is, if you cannot guarantee that the phase will end before the construct dies, so essentially you cannot guarantee that you will kill the boss before the construct dies and you have to do phase 1 again, you're going to absolutely wipe in that situation. Because the fact is that the prison mobs will eventually break out when the prison itself dies, and they will all come after you at the same time and just wipe you out. So you have to know when to use prison to buy yourself an appropriate amount of time, whether you're going to get through the phase or not. So if you're certain, if your raid is confident that you are going to kill the boss before the construct dies, then you can start prisoning mobs and just, announce to the raid, okay, I'm going to start prisoning Shadowcallers or souls or both, whatever, and not to bother attacking them. They can focus their damage elsewhere. But if you aren't sure, if there's any doubt, then don't try to do it. It's much better to play it safe in this phase by having a few raid members, DPS players, focus on helping to kill the ads, Shadowcallers and the souls, and let the robot deal the majority of damage to the boss, versus playing it risky and gambling that you may not keep the construct alive. And if you've screwed up, the prison, stuff is going to wipe you. On the other hand, if your raid has particularly high damage, and you're really good about interrupts, killing Dominators quickly, you absolutely can do this fight in one phase. So you don't have to do phase 1 ever again. On this particular kill, we were able to do that, and it worked great, but it was also close. So you have to know kind of ahead of time whether you're going to screw it up or not. But if you know that you're going to be able to do the stuff as quickly as necessary, then you can start prisoning. And in that case, you probably want to imprison the Shadowcallers and just let the Wailing Souls get dealt with the same way that you normally would, because most of the damage from them will be from the fire and from the orbs from the robot. You don't need a whole lot of extra damage from the raid, whereas the Shadowcallers, since they're single target, it's a lot of wasted DPS that could otherwise be on a Dominator or the boss or something like that. So finally, let's go over the basic role-specific tips and recap everything. For DPS in the construct phase, make sure you sidestep if you're targeted by a Fell Orb, the Charge ability, or if Prison is cast pretty much at any time, but certainly nearby. If you're asked to soak a Reverberating Blow cast in particular, maybe you're part of a swap group or something, make sure you step in front of the boss near the tank when your cast to soak is coming up, and then just get out of it afterward. During the Socrethar phase, make sure the Dominator is your top DPS priority target. This takes precedent over everything else because of just the danger that it presents. You'll also need a few ranged DPS, which should kill the Shadowcallers, and a few other DPS to help finish off the Haunting Soul sets. Melee generally will not be assigned to either of those. However, melee DPS should focus on rotating interrupts on Socrethar when he casts Exert Dominance. You need to make sure you interrupt every single one of these casts, so long as the Dominator is not active and therefore protecting the boss at the time. When you get debuffed with Gift of the Mornari, just step out of the raid a little bit and make sure that no one else is in the radius of your green circle so that no one else is taking damage. But otherwise, try to remain as close as possible to the raid and the stack point so that you can control the pathway that the souls will take when trying to reach you. Now, if you're tanking the Construct phase pretty much solo, you're tanking the Reverberating Blows by yourself, make sure you save your personal cooldowns, your big ones, for the third cast that you're soloing and beyond that. By the third cast, that's when you'll have the 5 stack maximum of Shattered Defense. So that's when you're going to be taking, it's about 2.5 million damage on Heroic before mitigation, and physical reduction, and all that stuff. So that's when you really need the big stuff. As mentioned, monks are particularly good tanks for this because you have Guard, which of course is very strong, Dampen Harm, 50% reduction, Zen Meditation, 90% reduction for one cast, as long as you time it properly, and then your own damage reduction cooldown beyond that. So my basic priority when I'm soloing these is when I'm doing 3 of them. The first one doesn't really matter, there's no debuffs. Second one, you can just use a Guard, or you can throw up Dampen Harm if you want to, but Guard by itself is okay with 3 stacks, I've found. And then I will generally use Zen Med for the third cast, third or fourth as well. Also, when you are taking the Construct, regardless of whether they're selling or not, make sure you face it toward whichever group of players or area of the room you want the next Reverberating Blows to hit, since it's always going to be targeting you. Lastly, in the Socrethar phase, if you're dealing with the Construct, just check the last section. And then finally for healers, just like ranged DPS, if you're targeted with the Fell Orb, the Charge, or if Prison is cast in the first phase, make sure you sidestep all those abilities so they don't affect any other raid members or yourself. Try to keep players topped off if they're going to be hit by the upcoming Reverberating Blow cast in the first phase. So this would be the current tank, of course, as well as any players that are explicitly assigned to take that next cast. So if you're using a rotation of a handful of players, make sure they're all full health, because otherwise they might die from that hit. During the Socrethar phase, if you get Gift of the Minari, step out of the raid just a little bit until that green circle is not endangering anyone else, but try to stay close to the raid if at all possible, so that the Wailing Soul paths will cross the fire lines that are created by the Construct pilot. And then lastly, make sure you dispel Shadow Word Agony if you see a high stack count, like 2 or 3 plus, that kind of thing. At 1 stack, you can probably just heal through it, but it will be up to you and your heal team members to decide whether it's worth dispelling or just healing through. All right, so I think that covers everything for Heroic and normal Socrethar the Eternal. As I said, mechanically there's not a whole lot going on, but it is critical that you know everything you need to do in particular phases, and the Construct pilot needs to be really solid. Healing needs to be great. DPS, especially burst damage on the Dominator, needs to be really good, as well as interrupts, mostly from your melee DPS, to prevent the Construct from taking extra damage that's unnecessary. As always, good luck, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. I once had this dream where I was piloting this giant robot. Felt like a badass from Pacific Rim or something. But I woke up, turned out I was actually sitting in a booth at McDonald's playing with my Happy Meal toys. Yeah. Also, I was 27 years old at the time, so I'm pretty cool.